My name is Laura. I work at Twitch. I'm Senior Director of the Commerce Products. The Commerce Products at Twitch. How many people are familiar with Twitch, first of all? Oh, thank God. Okay, so the Commerce Products at Twitch are the tools that our streamers use to solicit direct support from their audience. So things like subscriptions or cheering or other types of interactions where there's a exchange of finances to help support the streamers make that their full-time job. It's kind of cool. I joined Twitch in October of 2018. Prior to that, I had been at Adobe for 19 years because I'm really old. I started at Adobe in the video product. I was always in the video products. I started at Adobe. They hired me out of a university teaching video editing. And they hired me as a quality engineer. And they called me. I got a call from a recruiter asking if I was interested in a quality engineering job. And I'm like, oh, I'm not an engineer. I can manage like my computer stuff, but I'm not an engineer. And they're like, hold on. Let me explain what a quality engineer is. So they talked me through that a quality engineer, especially in this case, used the Adobe tools like a user, let them know if there were problems with them, and then someone fixed them. And I was like, oh, hold on. I get to tell you what you need to fix? Yes, sign me up. So I started on the Premiere team prior to it being Premiere Pro, which is the video editing tool at Adobe. Was a individual contributor quality engineer, became a lead, became a manager of 3 managers on that team, then became the primary manager on that team, then became the senior manager for all of the video and audio products at Adobe, the quality, and then I became the director of quality, and at that point I was like, okay, I'm kind of done with quality. At that point, I started looking at what do I want to be doing. I wanted to get earlier in the product chain. By the time you're in quality, you're usually cleaning up someone else's mess, right? That's exhausting. It's kind of like being the mom who has to go pick up the garbage and put away the laundry. I didn't want to do that. Also, by the time I discovered problems as a quality leader, it was often too late to fix them before they hit the customers. The other thing I discovered was a lot of the team members that I worked with were all video experts. They had all worked professionally in video or audio. They had a lot of passion for that customer. And I realized that that was honestly the most fun part of my job, was identifying problems in the workflow and figuring out how we address those problems in the workflow. And I didn't put 2 and 2 together right away. I decided I wanted to go into engineering leadership, which is crazy. But I picked up a project that was in need of a leader at that moment and started running Adobe Story, which was Adobe's first real service. It was an online collaborative screenwriting and pre-production management tool. Did you know Adobe did that? No, most people didn't. The product ended up folding after several years. It became incredibly popular in broadcast soap operas in the UK. That's a very narrow market. We had a hard time convincing other people that Adobe was a place for screenwriting or Adobe was a place for pre-production management. A lot of the tools that we had built, while very powerful and very cool, weren't picked up. So ended up folding that project. About the time I started leading that project, I was, as I said, doing some exploration on what I wanted to do with my life, what I wanted to do with my career, and I decided to go back to graduate school, because that's what a mother of 2 in the middle of a house remodel with a full-time job that requires a ton of travel should do. So I went back to University of Washington's master's degree in communications program, and I jokingly call it my master's degree in social media, but it opened my eyes to a whole world of things that were happening outside of broadcast and motion pictures. Now, I'd been on social media. I'd been super addicted to every new platform as they came out. And this gave me a reason to study them. And by studying them and spending justified time, I could be goofing around on Facebook. I'm doing my homework. Don't bother me. I got to do a lot more experience of something that was different than things I had already known a lot about, which is cool. Because anytime you can open your horizons a little bit, you open yourselves up to understanding new people and new customers and new problems. So I came back to Adobe and I said, oh my God, we're missing this entire segment of customers. We really need to start investing in work for YouTubers. And I was told, yeah, go figure out what that looks like. At the same time, having been the head of the Adobe Story product, the head of product management for the video products came to me and said, hey, you actually were doing a really good job product managing. And in fact, a lot of the things you had done when you thought you were a quality director was actually product management, because you were doing identification of problems and needs and documenting the ways they should be solved. I want you to lead the video services for Creative Cloud for video. And I was like, do I have to be a product manager? Because I was a jerk. And he's like, yeah, you'd have to be a product manager. Okay. So at that point, I wasn't committed to the name because I didn't really understand exactly what the role was. But I decided I have all this new time to do new cool things. So while I'm getting a master's degree, I should also go start a new career path. And I jumped in. We shut down Adobe Story. We started a beta program for a social publishing service, which would help with analytics and help with giving user feedback. We launched that at a trade show, our Mac show, as a giant public beta. I worked on all of the tools that helped connect the primary video tools, so the things that were like the connective tissue between Premiere Pro and After Effects, or After Effects and Audition, or Premiere and Audition, or just video streaming. So anytime you went to Adobe Stock and looked at video, we managed that piece. And I did that for a while, and that head of product came back to me and said, so you've been doing really well at this. What I want you to do is run all the products and all these services. And I, like a goofball, said, sure. And I did that for a while. And during that time, we continued to grow the products. We continued to satisfy customer needs. We continued to strive to serve new customer segments that we hadn't served before. Premiere got their first feature film edited on Premiere. We started being used by almost every large broadcaster, and it was a really good time. I got to meet all these cool YouTubers who I was watching and all these other amazing content creators. And during that time, I started watching Twitch. And Twitch was experiencing ridiculous growth in viewership and growth in streaming. And it was some of the ugliest content I'd ever seen. So I said to my boss, hey, we should do something. We should do something with this, because streaming is growing really fast. At this point, Facebook was also putting a ton of effort behind streaming. YouTube was doing live streaming. All of the little pop-up live streaming services like Periscope and others were coming up, and my boss declined. And I felt very frustrated. And I was like, I don't know why we're not doing this. It's so important. And I continued working on the products I was working on, and one day, LinkedIn popped up a little, hey, here's a job you might be interested in. And I think in the first time in my professional history, it was a job I was interested in. It was director of product for Bits and Cheering, which is one of the commerce products at Twitch. And I thought, I'll just go check it out. I don't even know that I'd want it, but it'd be cool to see what Twitch is like. And I didn't realize they had a Seattle office, and I'll just go check it out. And I went and interviewed, and very shortly after left Adobe and went to Twitch. So I've been at Twitch for a little over a year. In that time, I went from being head of Bits to head of Bits and Central Commerce to head of Commerce product. So the entire umbrella of products under that now are in a reporting chain that is more unified. That decision was made not because I'm amazing, but because there was a disconnect between the different products that we had and how we evaluated success for those products and prioritized how they were built. So I'm here tonight to talk to you about roadmaps, talk about how you get those great product ideas that come from your team and from your customers and from your stakeholders and from random people on the street, and put those into an order that makes sense, right? I recently took our organization with the other leaders in our group through a reorganization where we restructured the way that we imagine our product line. We went from being discrete buckets of product into an umbrella where we look at our customers as a shared customer, because our customers are a shared customer. They generally cross between the products that we produce and cross between the interactions that we produce, and they're all showing up to the same place. They're all showing up to look at the same content. They are not discrete product profiles. So instead of doing everything we can to make one successful and doing everything we can to make the other successful without looking between those products, which can actually cause competition, and success for this may be failure for this. So we're looking at our product line a little more holistically. In doing this, we reorganized our group, and we reorganized into 4 new buckets and promoted some new product, kind of product leads for those different areas. I was recently working with one of my product leaders, and we'd gone through all the hard part of setting the mission, vision, strategy, and we'd aligned what the groups were working on and what the KPIs for those different groups were, because we're stepping back from just looking at revenue, and we're looking at how do we move levers to make things push towards revenue, but without putting a revenue target on everything, because that's less fun to work towards. And it also, that competing thing happens a lot when you do that. And we gave some opportunities to people who hadn't been leading a whole product line before. And I was talking to this product manager, and she was really stressed. And I was like, what? Why are you so stressed? Like, she was starting to get their roadmap ready for Q1, starting to look at what they could do, should do, want to do, all of the wide open possibilities. And she just started talking about how much there was to consume and how much was available to put into this roadmap, and how hard it was to figure out the right thing to do and how to measure and this seems important, but this seems important, and I don't know how to reconcile those two. And she was really, really worried about getting it right, which brought to mind Chile Aragonia. Does anybody here watch The Good Place? Hands? Okay. Oh boy. So The Good Place is one of my favorite shows ever. I'm not going to reveal what the big tell behind the show is, but this character is a philosophy professor who spends his whole life in paralysis over trying to get to the answer for things. He believes if you analyze any question enough, you will get the right answer, which is exactly where my product manager was. And as I talked her through it and understood more about what her concerns were, I came to the point that she needed to hear. There is no right answer. In product management, there is not one right answer. You can analyze, somebody else can analyze, and you can come up to 2 different paths. And that doesn't mean either of them are wrong. There are many right answers. What you need to do is have a consistent approach so you know that you're measuring equally. So if I'm looking at features and saying, this is good, and this is good, and this is good, and I don't have enough time to do all 3 of those, I'll just do this one. There should be a reason why I'm choosing this one over the other one. And if I find some more time and I go, oh, but this is also good, I'm going to put that one in, and I'm going to ignore these 2. And I'm looking at them through different lenses. We're not necessarily getting to a place of good understanding of customer need, not getting to a good place for your product as a whole solution. And that can be overwhelming, it can be frustrating, and I'm telling you this, and you're like, yeah, we know that, and it's one of the harder parts of being a product manager. But for me, it's one of the most fun parts of being a product manager, because when you get that, remember when I talked about the open field and the opportunity to learn and change the future? It's awesome. So here's where product prioritization frameworks come in. This is where you start applying a system to how you evaluate the necessity and value of the different features, investments, products you could make, right? Yes, okay. Can I get some more participation? Maybe some voices?
Amen.
Yeah, all right, much better. Okay. So why would you use a product prioritization framework as opposed to just willy-nilly picking stuff, or just everything that's written in blue ink gets in the product? One is because we are not product managers in a silo. Or maybe you are, but if you are, I don't know who you're building for or where you build, that you just get to build your own thing. In general, we are working to satisfy a customer, to satisfy a company need as well. We have outcomes that we're looking for. By satisfying those customers, we are working with people who may not be as in depth in all of the options and features and priorities that we could have. So you set a standard for communication on how do we discuss the things that are in or out. So how do we keep that conflict down when something isn't making it in? How do I explain that to somebody who's passionate about that one feature that just isn't going to make it this time? And it also, like I said, it provides a similar sizing of value. So it gives you the opportunity to say, this is something that needs to be in. This is also something that needs to be in. This thing is different in this way, and it doesn't need to be in. But it gives you a language and a methodology that helps you to move through the possible into the possible. Yep. And I think I just said move through the possible into the possible, into the doable. How about that? Okay. Now, when you start off with project prioritization, you don't just jump in and say, I'm going to start just ranking stuff, right? Because we have to think about a number of influences for your business and for your customers always first. For me, the thing I always start with is, what have I heard from my customers? What have I seen in the data of use where problems are arising? What have I seen in behaviors that are unexplained? What do I know about my customers' behaviors and needs that might influence my product prioritization framework even? Yeah? Product strategy. If I'm in a growth period and I need to look at new user acquisition, that might give me a different prioritization than if I'm in a maintenance mode where I just need to keep the thing from crashing, or I just need to make sure it works on new OSs. Investment areas. If I know I'm expanding in a certain way to acquire a new customer set or to meet a company-wide goal, those things matter. Development cycles. How frequently am I shipping? How long do I have? Is it a big cycle where I can jam a lot of stuff in, or is it quick turnaround? With that goes resourcing. Do I have a huge team of talented people? Do I have one guy? Because all of that matters. It changes the way you prioritize. Stakeholder input. Are there things from teams that we work with, or teams that, or individuals in our organization who have a vested interest in the way our product works that I need to consider and make sure are part of my prioritization process? And in general, also the competitive landscape. If someone is outdoing you in one area, even if you choose not to go that direction, you should be aware of it and make that a conscious decision and prioritization choice, not, oh, I didn't realize, because that's bad decision making. Yes?
Great framework. Where in that framework fits, or how do you create a framework that fits with? So the thing that I struggle most often is prioritizing usability optimization, because it's not making direct money. It's really hard to prove if there's an actual problem out there, even though you kind of have a hunch or you have anecdotal knowledge. How do you build that into the big scheme of things?
Yeah, so right now I'm really looking at influences. I'm going to walk you through about 5 different frameworks. Some of them are way better aligned towards that customer friction point and UI optimizations. To me, I always think of it as, I am a firm believer that performance, stability, and usability are top tier features, always. And there should be a portion of my allocation focused on removing paper cuts, beautifying the UI and the overall workflow, especially for things that we've put in new or things that have been in for a very long time. So you have the opportunity to go and correct and course correct to make sure your product remains very usable. I'll call that one out. So did everybody hear the question, first of all? I realized I didn't repeat it. Okay, the question was, under a framework, where do you consider usability and UI improvements that may not drive revenue, but are still valuable to the customer experience? So to me, that comes in a number of different places, but I'll call it out where I would evaluate it under each of them. And some of the frameworks I walk through are going to prioritize that more highly than others. Like I said, personally, to me, those are top tier features. Those are things I always hold back for and always have a backlog of, we should be doing this because it's good for our customers. And I think it could also be that customers always first. Like, what are your customers saying? It's hard to use, it's confusing, I spend too much time. Those things don't sound like revenue generators, but they are. One of the products I worked on, we had carried forward a significant amount of technical debt because we had done a major rewrite. And we thought, oh, well, we'll get to that. And we kept kicking it down, kicking it down, kicking it down. And our customer satisfaction scores went way down because people were like, it doesn't work well anymore. And you have conflicting UI. You've put this new feature in, which reminds me of this other thing, but I can't use the paradigms that I've learned for that other thing to make it work. And so we spent a couple of cycles just working on fixing the problems that we had created for ourselves. And then people were all excited about new features again. But there was a period when we put new features in, people would be like, seriously? Can't you just fix the stuff? Yeah. Yes?
How do you represent that on the roadmap? Because sometimes those are very unsexy things that behind the scenes have to be done. But when a stakeholder or someone in strategy or whoever sees that, it's like, okay, I'll call out sales. That's not going to help me sell the product. I'd love to hear how you.
So there's a couple of ways to justify prioritization, right? One of them is it's going to drive revenue. One of them is it's that feature you've been asking me to put in. One of them is, hey, you really understand this thing. And one of them is it will reduce calls. It will increase positive sentiment from our customers. Both of those have real impact to the company bottom line. The product that I was mentioning before had, during the period where we had that unpleasant user experience spike, we got a lot more calls to customer support because things were confusing. By removing the confusion, we cut our customer calls, I think, something like in half. And it means that there's less cost spent on customer support calls. We also didn't have as many angry customers in sales calls because we were working with enterprise customers a lot. We'd be like, I keep hearing from my people that this thing just doesn't work. When you didn't have to have those conversations anymore, that was really nice for the salespeople. But if you can quantify the pain that's associated with bad UI or confusing UI or a frictionful experience, if you can quantify it into a number, for some people that's enough. They're like, oh, that's really big. That's big and bad. Yeah? I am a big fan of finding social commentary. So if someone has tweeted about something we've done badly, put that in your deck. This is the worst thing I've ever seen. Customers are saying it. Nobody likes to see that about their product, and you can usually find something that will support that.
And if it's on Twitter, it must be true.
Twitter is nothing but true. Right.
And another thing, sometimes if it sucks, just like a video of a screen capture and a PowerPoint isn't enough to show anyone.
Yeah.
Just having it be a line item without the video sometimes.
The other thing that you can do, and here's a little sneaky way to do it, is I keep a holdback, as I mentioned, for certain areas of investment. We have some for engineering effort that we hold back. So things like operational excellence becomes like a line item. Keeping the lights on is a line item. Friction removal is a line item. And that way people look at it and they're like, oh, the friction removal, that's always there. Yes, it is. And I'm not going to tell you exactly what we're doing because it might come up as a result of something we just did.
Right.
Yeah. I'm going to present a few of the frameworks that my teams have used and do use. And I'll talk you through a little bit of the pros and cons of those. You can ask me questions about them. We can dive deeper, or we can just keep running forward. So one of my favorites when I was working with teams that had very active user bases who were also accessible directly, so we had a means to connect with them directly, was buy a feature. And buy a feature, instead of getting into this survey of things, it helps you evaluate how much money people are willing to spend on things. So what you do is, depending on the features and the complexity of those features, you select the set that you are considering for a release. You price them based on how complex they are or how big they are, and you pull together either a group of customers, which is the best way to do it, who represent your various user segments. Don't just get all the people who work in one area of your customer, but you do a diverse set of customers. You give them this shopping list and you give them a budget. You have $100. Of your $100, what would you buy? Okay? And then they go through and they price it out. Now this is the experience, this experience was the one that our customers I was working with at the time said, I don't want any of these things. I'll give you $100 if you just fix your damn bugs. That's not on the list, but we made it on the list. So by asking them where they would put money behind things on a finite set of money, instead of having to explain to them, like, listen, we've got a finite engineering team and we're trying to ship on a certain time, you can kind of guardrail it. It's more fun, it's more interactive, and it's really easy to walk through even with people who don't have a depth of technical background and don't necessarily understand the dependencies. It requires your team to do a bit of upfront sizing, which is always good. And it gets you to be crisp about how you're describing your features, which is always good because it keeps feature creep kind of minimized. The problem with this method is that if your customers do not speak up and say, hey, you've given us this thing and all we want are these bug fixes, which a lot of times they won't, it only offers them the things that you know that you're planning on working on, and you don't necessarily get the feedback from customers on, these are all cool, but there's this other thing that we've been asking for and it's not on your list and we'd really like that instead. This is good if you know your customer segment really well and understand what their working priorities are. This just helps to knock them into place, but there are some limitations with any framework. All right, questions about buy a feature? Anybody want to buy a feature? No? Okay. Scoring. Scoring, I lumped a number of frameworks under scoring. What scoring seeks to do is take the balance of complexity and usefulness or value and assign it a number. So you get things that are all numbered in a similar way. Right now we're using RICE scoring where I'm at, which is reach, how many customers are going to use this thing, impact, how influential in their experience is this thing going to be, how much pain is it solving or creating, or fun it's solving and creating. Confidence. How sure are we that this will be used by that number of people and be this successful? It's also how sure are we that we can deliver it? And then you multiply those scores together and divide it by effort. So how hard is it? And you get a very nice score. And if you do this for all of your products, or for all of your features, you get a nice score to use. Again, good things about this. In order to get a good RICE score, or a lean score, or a weighted scorecard, or a value versus effort, any of these, you have to really be thoughtful about how you're sizing the effort of a product. Anything where you're looking at, is the value worth the time spent on it? You have to know how much time you're going to spend on it. You also have a pretty good understanding of what you perceive the value to be, right? So anything that forces you to go through that process up front, helpful, good, positive. The drawback of any scoring method is while you are getting a number, those numbers are still estimates, and some people over-rotate on the fact that I had a number that said that this was super high value and super, we had super high confidence. So you have to properly frame it with your team that just because it has a high number doesn't mean that it's guaranteed success. There's still a human thought process going into this process. There's still an evaluation. Things might become discovered as we start actually engineering it that are more complex. They also don't tend to look at dependencies because you're kind of looking at the things that you know how to build, and it's hard to get that firm value on things that are external. Right? Okay. Ready for, yes?
So how do you account for bias in that effort estimation, right? Because a lot of times the problem that we run into is the engineering teams, for whatever reasons, might have their own favorite feature. Or
oh God, yes. So there's a couple of ways that I have worked with this. So when it comes to effort, because effort is one of the things you are constantly looking at across all product frameworks, right? How big is it? I have broken up the engineers so they're not coming up with a number on their own. I have them write it down. and they have to come up with I think it's this big, independent of an engineering group effort. And then we talk through how they got to that point. Sometimes that's helped because I usually find there's a ringleader or two when they're sandbagging or overinflating. If you break them up and then have them talk through, oh, you guys are in conflict. You say it's a 200 and you say it's an 800. I'm just a dumb product manager. Help me understand. That can be really effective. The other way that I have used in the past with teams I've worked with for a while, if you understand the different, and you're using Agile, and you understand the different Scrum teams or your Agile team's velocity, if you translate that into a number of man hours, man months, and you go, oh, really? I can get this in 4 months? That's it? Cool. And then they realize that they're being like foolish because they're going to have to commit to doing that if I pick that feature or if this thing is really huge and it's obviously out of alignment. Sometimes it's just calling those things to light and bringing some question to it. But if you know your team's velocity, that's always a great number to go back to. And if you also are able to know who the instigators are, know who your allies are, that's super helpful. And I think in most cases, if you get into a common language around how you're evaluating, because I could totally sandbag impact, right? This is the most important feature I've ever heard of. So the impact score is like way out of control. It's going to overinflate over effort. No matter what it costs, it's going to be worth it. So you have to build the trust, right? Because it's a balance. So I always bring my engineering teams into all of our prioritization talks as peers. I have the final call on prioritization. That's my job as a product manager. But we're going to have a discussion about how things get prioritized. And there is an opportunity to push back if you feel like something is undervalued or overvalued. And I have the opportunity to push back if I think you're saying something's way too huge or way too small. So we can talk to. Because sometimes those giant values that are put on effort are really a lack of understanding of how complex the actual first shipping version needs to be. And I've had very recently an experience where I was working with someone who was saying something was going to be giant. And I was like, how are you getting that? Because that doesn't jibe with what I understand the code base to be or what the product needs to be. And they were adding additional requirements that weren't requirements. They were kind of, yes, we could do that at a later date. We might never do that. I don't actually think that's a requirement. But talking through the process really got us to a good point where we were able to agree on a moderate size as opposed to huge or tiny. Yep.
Another place I've seen it make it easier to focus on that effort piece is to identify where on your team is a consistent bottleneck. So on some teams it might be your back-end engineers, sometimes it might be your designer, sometimes it might literally always be a dependency on another team. And then literally just make all of your efforts focus on the bottleneck, and then you can just really hone in on one resource rather than looking at a whole span of things.
Yeah. Well, and the dependencies on resourcing, particularly if there is a bottleneck, if you have one front-end designer and that person is constantly overtasked, knowing that affects what you can prioritize. So it doesn't just affect the effort required, it also affects how confident we can get this done, period. Is one person able to spread themselves across a number of giant tasks? And those discussions need to be had. So that's an excellent point. Okay, this is one that is very much UI aligned when the question about how do you make sure those UI friction points are addressed. Story mapping. Have people done story mapping? So story mapping breaks your work that could be done and efforts that could be done down along the customer experience. So when they first come to your product, what does that first look like? What does the search function look like? What does the account creation look like? What does the first access of premium content look like? And you prioritize under each of those areas from most important to least important. So instead of looking at the entire product and trying to say, oh, well, something in account creation that's super huge. And I've got this thing over in, search that's also super huge. And then I've got a bunch of tiny things, but these tiny things actually are way more important. Instead of trying to prioritize disparate things, you break down the user flow, and then you draw a line across all those areas based on the amount of effort you have, and make sure that I hate the term minimum viable product because it should always be lovable. So the minimum lovable product is of the right quality, and then you can move things up or down based on that if things are disparate across the different parts of the experience. This is really good, in my opinion, for new products, when you're just starting a new workflow and experience. When you're looking, focused specifically on onboarding or friction removal, this is a really good way to do that because it is focused on the user's experience. What it doesn't always take into consideration are external strategy influences or marketplace influences. So things that another product may be doing that you're not doing don't necessarily always bubble up in the same way in this mapping as they do in other prioritization frameworks. So, like I said, there's a million ways to get answers. Just being aware of what ones are good at and what ones are less good at, and when to apply one versus the other is really helpful because, like I said, my team's using RICE right now, but we've also used, there's another one where you look at delighters and called the Kano method, where you give a survey to your customers and they rate how important things are. And then you kind of balance how many things are fundamental, how many things are exciting and fancy and new, and how many things are kind of in that mid-range. Yep, so a billion ways to get to a right answer, and I'm just walking through a handful of them. This one is one that I really, 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 really love. And this is one, if you have a team that likes to debate, this is for you. This is the Moscow method. Now, the Moscow method has nothing to do with Russia or information thievery or influencing elections. Moscow is an acronym that is made from must have, should have, could have, won't have. So the MSCW kind of pull from there. So instead of looking at an entire backlog and prioritizing across that entire backlog in relative rank order for now and forever, Moscow method looks release by release. So you're looking at a snapshot in time, which I think is pretty cool because I don't know about you guys, but the industries I've worked in have shifted dramatically, even in the time span of a release. Influence have come into play that we need to address that maybe weren't there 6 months ago, or maybe changed dramatically in priority from 6 months ago. The Moscow method has you bucket your effort and your features and your investment areas into the must-haves, things that absolutely have to be in your product. Can't live without them. Customers would scream. Should-haves. These are the things that are not quite must-haves, not quite the things that would make you look ridiculous if you delivered a product without them, but the things that a good product would have. It's beyond that. We've got table stakes, and here's fine china, right? Could-haves are the things, if we had flexibility and time to do these, I would include these. These are the things that could be differentiators. They could be good for our users, but they're not in that requirement range. So you see there's like shades going on, and then the won't-haves. The won't-haves to me are the most important. The things that I am not going to do in this release, and you can't make me. And having a criteria set for why those aren't important now is really useful for those conversations when your stakeholders come back and go, but that thing, customers have asked us for that thing. You're like, yes, we're not doing that. In this release, we are not focusing on personalizing dog food flavors. So the personalization feature doesn't need to be there, right? It also focuses very much on the order of things that need to be done. Now, the thing I like about the Moscow method is that these buckets, they are flexible over time. So I can start the next release, move should-haves into must-haves, some of them down to could-haves. So you can continue to rebucket things, and the only ones that you really need to focus on getting into a good rank order are the must-haves and the should-haves, really. The could-haves, you kind of bubble those up, but the won't-haves, if I'm not doing them this really, I don't have to argue relative priority between two things I'm not doing. It doesn't mean I'll never do them. They may come in the next release, but they are set aside for the time being, so it takes a huge number of things off the table. Yes?
With this method here or framework, are you also then working with dev managers to layer in kind of that tech health, tech debt items? Because the dev managers and the engineers
Yes.
always have that list of, I have to do this thing.
Yep.
That are outside of the process.
Yeah, and this model is really good for having those conversations with engineers where they have that, we have to do all of this right now. Cool, so we have no other must-haves. If that's all we can do, given the engineering, I guess we're just having the 87 things on your list that we're doing. Cool, that's a terrible product. And it starts this conversations. How many of those things are real must-haves?
Yeah.
How many of them are, we can phase it in? Is there a smaller version? Is there a first step? What is the trade-off to move that to a should or could have? But it gets, when you put these things into the similar buckets, it gets the conversations a little more candid around, we have finite effort. We know that in our must-haves, we can fill that up with all of the effort that we have. And those things might not be enough to make a compelling product. And then you start moving things to make round out your product. I've always found it really helpful with developers to make sure that they are accounting for all of their 87,000 things that we want to do, or tech standards, or new APIs, or alignment to company security standards, or whatever, and getting those ranked in the same way that we rank features, because it is always frustrating to have to cut something because at the last minute that tech standard thing exploded. And now it's pushing all your stuff that you were really excited about talking with customers about out a release or two. So having them participate in prioritization for everything you're doing is really useful. The other way you can do it is hold back X amount of developer weeks. Mm-hmm. This is the keeping the lights on. This is the tech standard excellence. What I've found with that is that it doesn't always account for the depth of things that we need to do. And there are often things that look a lot more like features that end up kind of getting punched into that and then dropped out because there's just not enough time. So the things that look a little more like features or have a dramatic impact on the end user experience, I like to call those out as features that we prioritize. Yeah. Yes?
Have you had cases where you've had to justify which framework or approach you take with your stakeholders, and there's disagreement about the meta approach of how you think about what's important and what's not?
I haven't really. I think the closest that I came is when we aligned on RICE for the model, for the current product work that we're doing right now, because we're kicking off these new teams and we're trying to get into the mindset of we've taken people who had worked on one thing and put them on something else. And so they're like new teams that are forming, and it kind of gives them a standard for how do you evaluate known versus unknown. There was some question about are we going to measure everything up to one RICE score? So we have these 4 areas of investment. Are we going to have them essentially battle it out for who has the highest RICE score? But in that case, our intention was never that, team 1 was going to go take their top issues and battle it out with team 2. We decided that there was an alignment on effort across these teams, and we had staffed them based on the investment. And so what it really came down to was kind of an education on how do you use a framework more effectively, and got engineers more involved and the technical program managers more involved in how are we thinking about this and why are we using this magic number, and keep them from over-rotating on the number. I have in past not had a problem getting people to align on a framework. Normally, the way I present it when I'm working with stakeholders is I bring in the criteria that we're using, explain how their input changes what would or would not go into a product. And as long as they understand what we're doing, people are generally pretty okay with it. The biggest pushback I've had is when we have decided to move an investment area out And that has less to do with the framework than it does with the strategy. And so sometimes explaining a strategy to, we're not going to invest any more in 3D printing of elephant pants. That's not something that we're doing. But I love elephant pants. Yeah, we're not doing that. That has been more of the discussion than the framework for how we prioritize dog pants and cat pants. Yeah? And clearly I make strange products. Yes?
In terms of the Moscow framework, would you create this list once before you define the MVP and then the must-have score into the MVP, or would you keep creating this list again for every release, like for MVP or MLP and V1?
So the way I approach it is each new release is a new approach. So every time I come back to it, I look at my must-haves and say, this is no longer a must-have. And sometimes you'll find things that, oh my God, elephant pants are through the roof. That's now a must-have. And I never thought we'd work on elephant pants again, but now it's all we're focusing on. We don't have no other time to do anything else. So I look at it, every release becomes a fresh approach. And that's one of the reasons I like this in an agile model, because it doesn't marry you to a really long, highly prioritized, potentially out-of-date backlog that requires constant grooming. This is a snapshot of, in the amount of time we have, these are the priorities that we have. And so this one for me feels really like flexible, and it's like going shopping every time you start a new release. And I really like shopping. So does that answer your question? Yes?
How often do you change methods from release to release? Like, it sounds like you base it on maybe the team you're working with, or is it kind of just, hey, roll the dice and pick?
I base it on a number of things. One is the team that I'm working with. I'm working with a very engineering mindset team right now. Rice satisfies that in a lot of ways. How many outside non-technical people are going to be involved in our discussion? Rice is really hard for that one. If we have a lot of, when I was working a lot with enterprise customers who maybe just want features that they can explain in 5 words, and we then have to say, oh, no, that's really hard because it's this giant, massive thing, and unwind it. Moscow does a little bit better of giving like here's a huge thing you're asking for. Here's a small thing. Which ones do you really need? Which ones can we drop down? Hey, you put that really big thing in that bucket. Now that bucket's overflowing. What of these are no longer in that bucket? Or do we need to expand the time that we have to get these things done? And it has some really refreshing conversations. I look at the team mentality that I'm working with, how many external voices are in the process, how technical those voices are. Also, what has worked? If I went through a process that was excruciatingly painful, which I have, I probably don't use that one again. Unless the excruciation was that it was something that we were learning, and then the next time gets easier. Sometimes that is part of the process, and sometimes it's just like, yeah, that was really not the way this team thinks. Let's get something better. Yes?
When you put it in a time context, how much time do you spend on prioritizing with the team versus like the release cycle, for example?
Yeah, it depends on how big your release is, right? For something small, I'd probably go with a pretty quick. I tend to think prioritization, there's a lot of pre-work to a prioritization session that needs to take place. That is something that I encourage my teams to be constantly grooming. So as I'm coming up with new features as a product manager and I'm hearing things from customers, I start scoping like, oh, it absolutely has these 4 requirements, and the other stuff is just, icing. And then I'll maybe talk with an engineer, even though they're working on release product, and say, hey, I'm looking at this thing. Is this huge? Is it small? And they go, well, it's kind of medium. Okay, cool. So I know this is important and medium, and I'll kind of put it aside. And I just add it on my list on my database of stuff I'd like to do. There are other times when you don't have that luxury. There are other times when you sit down and you have the big fist fight over how big is this, how hard is it, what do you exactly mean by this? In organizations where you move very fast and have shorter release cycles and shorter sprint cycles or shorter agile cycles, that is more of to me, it becomes like a day-long thing where you get your team together and you force them into a room until you get agreement on how big things are and how important things are. But I think once the prioritization is done, like once the scoping is done and how big things are, the prioritization part is the fun part, and it tends to go pretty fast because you've already thought through the complexity. You've kind of already, as a product manager, thought through, oh, yeah, without these 18 features, this isn't going to happen. And that there's no way we have time to do all of that right now. And in fact, in going through the process of thinking through this feature, there's this precursor feature that I could put in now that is smaller and easier and better. Or I'm going to wait on all of these things to the next release when I have a little bit better thought process. Yeah? Yes?
So from Moscow, you mentioned that sometimes the buckets start overflowing.
Yeah.
How do you define the size of those buckets?
I tend to look at how much time I have in my release cycle. So I don't necessarily up front say this one can only have X amount of things in it. I encourage people to be really honest about what their ranking is. And sometimes the buckets start overflowing, and that's when you're like, hey, clearly we're working on this product that's supposed to be done in 4 months for 4 years. That's just not possible. So we need to recalibrate. The biggest drawback of the Moscow method is overprioritization of must-haves. People are like, no, it has to happen. Absolutely. Must happen this release. I'd die. We all die. The world would explode. So calibrating properly and being able to, like I said, this is the debate team one. You have to argue. Sometimes, really? Elephant pants? You're sure? We'll all die if we don't have elephant pants. Getting into those discussions, sometimes you learn something. Like, no, we actually really have to have this thing that's impossible. And then you need to go back, can we build the thing that we thought we were going to build? And if we need more than 4 months, can we get that? Or do we need to shift our approach in how we satisfy these customer needs?
Does that imply that there's also some effort estimations for this approach?
Absolutely. Yeah. So when you look at the Moscow method, you have the size and kind of what you're doing here is kind of doing the value in a shared space. So we know how big things are. And as a product manager, I know what the impact is and how the feature looks and feels and what it's going to bring to the customers. But we go through of this list of stuff we've got, how many of these absolutely have to be in this specific release to serve our release goals? And that becomes the discussion. So yeah, the effort you have to have it understood, because I could put 400 things in that take 400 years or 4 days, depending on the size of them. If I don't have that differentiated, any framework is going to be a problem. Yeah? And I saw your hand go back up.
Yeah, it's kind of going on a tangent, or maybe to that core point of how do you debate value and how do you make sure you have the right data at the point in time when you have the discussion about people dying because elephant pens are not there.
Yeah.
Because sometimes data is sparse or it's not available in a form that will actually convince somebody, because data is also debatable.
Yes.
Especially when you really want elephant pen.
Yeah, totally. So I'm going to tell you a really dirty secret of product management. We don't have all the answers. We never will. We will never have all the data that proves we're doing the right thing. If you do, you are working on something that is so well understood and kind of boring, probably. Not to malign anybody's projects that are completely understood with all the data you would ever want, completely understood, except I am. What a product manager needs to do is bring the why we are doing something to the table. So our job is to explain, this is important because X, Y, and Z. We are solving this need. This is a painful need. Everybody I know now has elephants. None of them have pants. They're getting written up for elephant obscenity left and right. They won't be able to pay their electricity bills. Elephant pants are the thing. Okay? As a product manager, I need to have that credibility with my team that I have done my homework to understand customer needs, to understand competitive landscape, to understand stakeholder values, to be able to justify that we are putting monkey pants on hold because the monkey problem is smaller, but the elephant problem is bigger, right? So a lot of it comes down to building credibility and trust. Data, I love data. I'm like a data junkie. But in my world, data doesn't tend to answer my questions. It tends to give me the next set of questions I've got. And so I can bring data to the table and say, hey, I've got this data. And without fail, somebody in the room is going to be like, did you think about? I'm like, ah, crap. No. So everything that we do with any model, any framework, is we are working on best understanding and best estimates. And this is why there is no one answer. Because if we had all that data that completely defined our product and the future of our product and everything we should do with data and backing, we wouldn't need a framework. We would just go by the data. But yeah, the data becomes a problem. There is also the case where the data disproves what you're talking about. So if you are using everybody has elephants, you should probably know the increase in the elephant owning population amongst your customer segment, right? You can't just come in with no information. I had a product manager actually today come to me with a project that she's been working on, and she was looking for data on one of the underlying assumptions that somebody else had given her. Here's this, we know this. And when she started trying to value that, apparently they just knew it. They didn't know it in data. No report had ever been pulled. Nobody had looked at that data point. And it led her to question and kind of roll back some of the things that they had done. So look for data, but also understand that data is malleable and can be manipulated and misrepresented. So also know things by talking to people, know things by validating your data, know things by understanding the rationale on why that was validated in the first place. Yeah?
Significance.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to measure.
It's a really hard thing to measure. And this is why, like, product management is a little bit of a dark art. Like, you use all these things. You've got data, you've got customer interviews, you've got, customer feedback, you've got your engineering efforts, and you've got your competitive analysis and the product teardowns you've done. You can still be wrong. You can also be more right than you thought you ever would be. I have had products that when they went to market were ridiculously more successful. We thought it was a blip, and it was a bang. And we were like, whoa, okay, why? What did we not understand about this pain point or the customers we were serving? So there is always an element of surprise with product management, and it's one of the things in my mind that makes it so fun. Yeah? Okay. This one is one that I kind of made up because it's one that I've used with teams when we are driven by KPIs other than hard metrics, when we are looking at levers, moving a specific lever for a part of our business, and things that are within our control that we consider input metrics. What can we directly influence that could influence the longer term benefit for the kind of traditional growth metrics, right? The way I have encouraged teams to think about this is use prioritization to determine which questions you have that most need answering, and which questions, when answered, will give you the biggest push to that metric. Does that make sense? Kind of? I know my customers all have elephants. I'm going to use this one, and I have no idea where it even came from, but elephant pants are the thing tonight. So we know that 90% of our customers have elephants. We also know that 20% of them have pants. The elephants, not the customers. God, that would be a whole different thing. Okay? We know that our customers' happiness depends on their elephants having pants because we've read this on social, because they've reported this to customer support, because people with elephants with pants have a longer lifespan according to recent studies. I'm making stuff up, clearly. What do we hope to learn? We hope to learn if providing an understood need that betters their lives makes them more likely to continue to be a customer, retention, or spend more on our product because of the pants, our poo-poo, or bring new customers who have not yet been in our cohort of pantless or panted elephants to our marketplace because we are now the premier purveyor of elephant pants conversion. So what we're trying to do is move our business metrics, but we're moving it with things that we can measure a little closer to the bone. Yeah? So for me, I like this one when I've got a team that's feeling antsy. This is one when my product manager was feeling like she didn't know what the right answer was. I'm like, just guess. What do you think the right answer is? What makes you think that? Cool. You think the right answer is this because you know these things about our customers. So you're already doing better than most people could do. What do you think that looks like? If you're right, what does that end up looking like? And it puts it into a place where it feels like there's less wrong and right. It feels a little more like gambling, a little bit like betting. For some people, that's a real nice, soft space to work in. You still obviously have to look at what your priorities are for your organization, what your priorities are for your business strategy, how these things roll up to move your key metrics. But it does make it feel a little bit more iterative when you're saying, we're going to test this. We think this is the outcome, and here's why we think that's the outcome. It feels a little more like a conversation than are you right or wrong? Which can be off-putting for, especially, this is one when I'm bringing product managers up from being IC product managers who I do things like, hey, here's a thing I need you to go figure out how to build. Go do that. And they aren't necessarily laddering up to how that looks for the business. This one works really well for that first step into laddering up to the business. What does this do on a broader scale? This isn't just one thing that I need you to write a spec and understand the customer workflow for it. This goes into to that next tier of thought. How do you think bigger than the one thing? Yeah? Yes?
So if I come in saying customers are going to spend 20%, or your assumption is 20% more on your site or whatever, and you get 5% in reality, how do you dictate that to stakeholders saying, these were assumptions, how do you, I guess, still keep credibility? Or how do you, not credibility, yeah, because credibility.
No, it is credibility,
yeah.
Right? Because you were wrong.
Yeah. It is an assumption. And
it is an assumption.
So if
Yeah.
you come back to you and be like, here are two numbers, because they're going to see facts in front of them.
Yeah. So product managers are wrong all the time. We ship garbage more than we should. So with this one, the thing that I think has worked for stakeholders with me is if I bring them along the story, we know this, we believe this, and this should be the outcome based on what we understand. And you don't get that outcome, and then you come back to your review and you say, you know what? People cared a lot less about elephant pants than we thought. We've also seen, by doing a little post-release analysis, that actually there was a lot of false reporting of elephant owners. That people just had really big dogs. We didn't have a good intake mechanic on our website to report what kind of pet you had, and everything got reported as an elephant. It was confusing and wrong, and we fixed that problem, and what we're going to do now is look at really big dog pants with the understanding that we've solved this other data point problem. So if you're wrong, it may not do 20%, maybe it does 5%, right? 5 is still better than 0, and actually a 5% overall revenue growth, I'd happily take that. Right. Yeah. No, I'm just teasing. But no, the thing that you do is you go back with all of this. Then what? I've prioritized. I've got my priorities list. What do? You execute. You go and deliver things. You learn. You evaluate where you were right and wrong, and you do it again, right? So everything comes down to, we prioritize this based on the assumption that it would do well for us. Did it do well for us? And then why not? And so then you go through your data, you go through user stories, you do user interviews, you evaluate what actually happened, because that kind of stuff is amazing. Like, hey, we put this thing in and nobody used it, but they all went to this other thing that had previously not been touched a lot. Why? So you learn, and then you repeat the process. Now, knowing these new things that we know, how do we make better choices in the next time? And it's always just honing your story. It's always honing your product. It's always iterating, right? Yes?
So is it better to be wrong, or is it better to not make a mistake?
I think that if you never made a mistake, and I tell my team this a lot, so yeah, if you are never making a mistake, you're not doing very interesting things. You're staying in a really safe zone. You're in that product that all the data tells you exactly what you need to build time and time again, and you never have to guess. That sounds tedious. It also means if you never make a mistake, you're never making a big bet, right? Think about things that have been very transformational. If I told you that I was going to create a device that you use every single day that's going to cost 3 times as much as the device you currently have, but has half the features, it just looks better. Do you think as a product manager that's a great device to build? No? Because the iPhone did pretty well, right? And it didn't have the ability to copy paste in text. It didn't have the ability to text images. There were a lot of features missing from the first iPhone. But the experience on that and the bet that was placed on that was correct because of the understanding of the type of user who would use an iPhone, right? So I would rather have a good mix of right and wrong. I would rather not be wrong all the time, because then you would be unemployed. But I think you have a certain amount of things that you know, and you know them through data, you know them through customer interviews, you have the highest level of confidence. And then you have to have some things that are a little less known, some things that are brand new, some things that are controversial, some things that are built on assumptions from things you've learned, but it's a big step, not a tiny step. Because those things are what keeps products vibrant. Yeah? And I saw your hand go up. Yeah?
Yeah, I love that you use the term bet, because that is a really, really important word. So we always talk about, I don't want to be wrong, right? And there's a great book out there called Thinking in Bets. I don't know if anyone's read it. It's by Andy Duke. It's a wonderful book. But from a product perspective, what I love about it is that you don't want to go into most situations trying to be right. Because you're probably never going to be right. So the title of the book is Thinking in Bets when you don't have all the facts. And you most certainly won't always have the facts. So if you go into those discussions and talk about the probability of what could happen, it's less about being right or wrong and more about, well, what chance do we have to succeed here? And it's less about the right-wrong thing. And after I reading this book, I was like, wow, that really changes the dynamic.
Totally.
Right? Now you don't have to go back to sales or the stakeholder or the customer and say, well, we were wrong. It's like, well, we had a pretty good idea that the probability of this working is like 10%. It was a big bet. It was going to be really hard. And then it's like, oh, well, no wonder it didn't work. It was a big bet. As opposed to, a much higher probability.
Absolutely. I also, in the hypothesis-driven framework that I was talking about, a lot of the things that I encourage people to do there is, what are we testing and how small can it be? How will I get more information on, especially on big bets? We're going to go and make this enormous thing that we think people will love, but we have no idea other than gut instinct. And we saw something similar, in the store that sells horse pants. We don't know. But how small can I make that bet? Can I start by doing something that's a sprint? Is there a way I can put it together that is satisfying, that is 2 sprints? Is there something that I can get signal back so I can do it? And if people are like, oh God, no, we're not touching that at all, we can walk away from it. And this is one of the things that we've done that I worked on last year, was a huge bet, and we segmented down into minimum. This will give us signal based on these criteria. that didn't work. We're not going to do more of it. This will give us signal based on these criteria. Yeah, looks like it's good. Let's go to the next stage. These are the next things that would need to be true for that giant thing to work. Yeah, we can't make those happen. Okay, so we know that the first tier is good. We know that the second tier is not going to resonate with our users. So instead of, I talk a lot about big bets. I talk a lot about like, hey, do things, think about what big could be or what different could be, or how far you can get from the known. But it doesn't mean do stupid things. And it certainly doesn't mean throw all of your resources on things that you have not enough signal to have a gut feel that it's the right thing. And be realistic about how certain you are. If you convince your stakeholders, oh no, this is a slam dunk, absolutely a slam dunk, it's going to be amazing, and it isn't, you lose credibility. If you're able to say, we think this has the potential to be big, and it sounds like I'm using soft words, but product management is all about building credibility and building reliability and helping people down that path with you. If I come in and say, we believe this has the potential to be big because of these 3 things that we know. This is the expected outcome if we deliver this thing. It puts it into a understandable kind of set of expectations that people can take apart instead of, well, you told me it was going to be huge. Now I have a whole warehouse full of elephant pants. Yeah? Yes?
Oh, so quick question. So at some point, if you keep making mistakes, like you're gonna have a talk with them, right?
Oh God, yes.
And speaking of like bets, would you rather have someone who makes $10 bets, but then mostly makes like $300 in wins, or someone who makes $500 bets, keeps losing, but then makes like a $10,000 pot? Like, who are you looking at?
Oof. Oh,
What's your betting strategy?
Yeah, my betting strategy.
Do you have a framework?
So for how I put people out on the betting floor, let's see if I can walk through this one in a way that makes sense. That's a really good question. I look for people who have the ability to understand when they're making a big bet versus a little bet. And I look for people who can balance their portfolio in the same way that you would manage your 401k, with some things that might have a huge potential and some things that are stable, right? If someone fails on a lot of small bets, but the one that they land is enormous, I would have, let's see, how it is enormous and how enormous was measured is important. Is it enormous because now all of a sudden my customers will never leave because they are so addicted to that new thing that was put in? Then I probably am pretty forgiving. Is it revenue? Maybe. But I would wonder about what happened with all those small bets if we did things that eroded customer trust or eroded usability or fragmented product strategy, or took our product down a path that we're not going down anymore, which adds confusion. So I don't think it's as easy as a big success or a small success or a small failure. Because if you do enough things, exactly, you go back and you learn from what worked, didn't work, make different choices, and repeat. But for somebody who continually was like, hey, here's the thing, let's just go do it, let's do it, I would probably have a talk with that person about like, you're going to go bankrupt one day. I'm really worried about your retirement planning. Yeah?
So when you think about the hypothesis-driven approach, some organizations have more of affinity to benchmarking and some
Yes.
don't.
Yes.
We are more obsessed with the customer than we are with the competitor.
Yes.
And so in such cases, sometimes I've found that they're not a competitor, but perhaps somebody else in the industry has done something similar with some tremendous results.
Mm-hmm.
Have you found using such external information, data, helpful to
Yes.
drive the hypothesis?
Yes, because I can usually find if this, if we're targeting the same or similar customer segment. There's enough overlap in the motivations between my customers come to me and they go to this other person. They've done this thing which has transformed their business or has given them enormous success. I've looked at it in the context of my business. And you can't just I would never recommend just looking at other influences in the market and be like, yeah, we're going to do that because they did it. Let's go do that. That's playing catch up, and that's never a good strategy. But if I look at my business and say, this opens an opportunity for my business to grow, this solves a need for customers that I hadn't thought of solving, and I evaluate it and it is the best approach, they've solved a problem in the most elegant way, then I would use that data to say here. What you can also do, if it's done well for them, but you think you have a better solution, you can use it to point to the customer pain. They had success with this because this removed the customer pain point. I think we can eliminate the pain point by doing this instead, right? So I do think comparisons are important. I don't think that looking at your competitors and just trying to target their business is the right way to go. I think what I have always looked at as my core is what is the right thing for my customers. And if I can gain insight into the customers that I want to serve and make their experience as overwhelmingly positive as possible. And that takes understanding not only what I can deliver, but what else is out there. Because they may be having that great experience with that one new feature, but having 1,700 other pain points, right? And I may choose hey, they've solved that pain point. That's not one we're going to take on. That one is lessened in our experience because we've got these other great benefits. So that we're just going to let people have that little friction. But I do think understanding what the choices your audience has does make a difference. Yeah? And all of that's just data. All of that's just insights. You had a question.
Yeah, it was more of an observation. One of the things that I'm constantly surprised by is people RATs or risk case assumption tests haven't made it into the parlance as much as MVPs or MLPs have. Is that something that I've used very successfully in the past to actually disprove an hypothesis?
Yeah, definitely. Agreed. Yes.
So mine's kind of scenario-based question.
Okay.
So it goes back to I guess the beginning of a product roadmap. So let's say you join a team and then it's found that users are unhappy with the product because of performance issues, like let's say bugs and whatnot, or just the whole flow of it. But this tax is pretty heavy on the team in general. But there's also push from stakeholders above that are saying we need to push new features fast and keep it going. How do you? I guess what would be your approach to getting this roadmap started? Saying this is something that's core to our product, perhaps. Like let's say perhaps that out or something. How are you able to sort of balance that need to be moving fast when it's you need to be first to market versus we need to make this good for our customers?
Yeah. That's a constant tension, right? Every time you're hey, we need to solve these ongoing problems instead of making bright shiny, there are always going to be people, why don't you just make shinier things? What if we made it shinier? Could that be cool? I've got this idea, it could be shiny. You're going to think I'm a framework junkie. I always start every product thought process with a product framework. What are my customers' needs? Who are they? How do they identify with my product?
And do you start from scratch if you're going to an existing product?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to tell you that I went to Twitch and had to learn a whole new customer. So for me, putting together who are they? What motivates them? Why are they spending money on Twitch? I mean, it's the same anytime you start thinking of what motivates somebody to participate with your product. If you can call out those motivations, if you can call out, when I worked on creative tools, people use those tools to make money. They had a finite number of hours in a day. They wanted to have high quality product. They wanted it to be stable, reliable. They wanted to have minimal crashes. Oh boy, these product requirements come way high up. They need the product to align with the current industry trends. They need to make sure that the dominant video formats are supported, but they don't necessarily need every new emerging technology. And if you start doing good customer segmentation and understanding how people are using your tools and what the needs of those segments are, then you can start looking at commonalities, like nobody wants a product that crashes all the time. It will run people out of your product. That has a high value. Beautiful, unstable products don't tend to do well very long. So beautiful, highly featured garbage is still garbage. Like I said, I am a huge advocate for quality, stability, and performance. These things are, to me, like possibly coming from when I joined the software world. I had been a user at the art university where I was working training editors. I was using a product that had a lot of problems. In order to get these students able to make their work happen in the allotted lab time that they had, I had to create these workarounds for them so they could get around the broken parts of the product. I had one product workflow that every student had to complete that was 37 steps for something that was replacing a button click. I try and put myself in the shoes of the customer with pain, and if you can quantify that pain, there are certain things that aren't that painful. Here is a hidden crash. Almost none of our customers are going to run across it. It's one person doing this really weird thing. Okay, we don't need to fix that. Here is a process that is used 800 times a day in our product. It is 6 steps, it should be 1. High pain, high value to fix. And so look at the relative pain when it's prioritization again. For the cost to fix it, how much better is my product? Yeah? But yeah, it's hard because I do hear that same like, we want new stuff. We all want new stuff, but I want new stuff that works. Yep.
Value is a quotient. So all your inputs matter.
Yes, absolutely.
And so you prioritize your inputs so you get your right quotient of value.
Absolutely.
Company vision, mission, goals. You have a framework that accounts for the direction that the overall company is going.
So I think any framework that you use has to be cognizant of the way your company is moving. You have to understand the influences on how your company perceives its business and its challenges, and make sure that you are properly calibrating things like customer need. If I am going after a customer that my company doesn't think is particularly valuable because it doesn't feed into their larger value chain, my prioritization may be wrong for my company. So there's a wrong product. I think that all of those things you should be immersed in those enough to have them influence every part of a product framework. They aren't discrete pieces. They're like the landscape that you've put your framework on top of. That's why I called them out in the front, these other considerations. The other considerations like customer need, the other considerations like competitive landscape, like customer or product strategy, company mission, having those as a foundation for everything that you're evaluating is really important. And there's not like here, think about it at this point in the process. It needs to be underlying everything that you do, and it should be motivating why you're doing what you're doing in the first place. Yes?
Would you be able to put a percentage on how much, I guess, psychological mind games you use in a team as a product manager?
Mind games? I don't use any mind games. I tend not to think of them as mind games.
She's not playing.
Yeah, I think I don't like to think about playing mind games. I think the thing that I employ as a product manager and as a product leader is good storytelling. And so it's less mind games, it's more bringing someone along the process with the customer influence and the reason I'm valuing things the way that I am. Are there times where I have stare downs with engineering managers because I think they're wrong in how big they've sized something? Yeah. Are there times where they size something giant because they don't believe my prioritization? Yeah. And those generally get solved by having a conversation, not playing mind games. 2%? 2% pure mind games? Yeah? I mean, let's be honest, we all play a few mind games. Yeah? Any other questions? Yes?
I don't know if this is relevant, but I'm curious if you had cases where if you're selling enterprise software, then convincing the end user and the buyer are not the same people.
Yes.
So if you look at the data and you want to improve the end user experience, that might not necessarily get you the deal. Like how would you
Oh. Yes. Yes, I have had that experience. In fact, the products that I worked on at Adobe were sold into 3 channels. We had Enterprise. We had Teams, which was a set of features that allowed people in small groups to share products in a way that was like a business instead of an individual. It had some connectivity, but not quite as much full customizability as the enterprise products, and then we had individuals. And when we were working on those products, I was constantly working with purchasers or the decision makers who weren't necessarily the people who were using them. What we ended up doing in those projects, once we got into a point where we were working more directly with the enterprise, we pulled together a focused user group from their users. So I'd say, hey, in order to make this the best product possible, it would help if I had 8 to 10 people in your organization who will be using this tool as part of their job. That way I can make sure that it works well in your environment. A lot of enterprise tools need to be extensible to cross other enterprise tools. And your specific setup is important to take into consideration. And usually the decision makers would be like, all right, okay. Decision makers generally don't want the people who have to use the tools to hate them. Like the tools. Or them. I guess they probably don't want to be hated either. I don't know. I'm not a real decision maker, like at that enterprise purchasing level. If you bring that into your user stories, if you talk about the efficiency that it produces, and especially in enterprise, for me, efficiency, integration points, simplicity of onboarding, a lot of those user-facing problems have quantifiable value for an enterprise. One of the things that we worked on a lot when I was at Adobe was doing direct integration with enterprise solutions into Premiere and After Effects and Audition, where you could directly access your media access or your media asset management system within a panel within Premiere. So I didn't have to take my brand new editor who I've just hired right out of college and show them, to get your media, you have to click on this icon here and then use this password and go into this database. And your stuff will be under this folder name and this folder structure, and you have these rights. They would sit down at Premiere, launch Premiere, and it would be in Premiere. So they never had to think about that path. It dramatically reduced onboarding time for them. And how nicely that was integrated, how beautifully the workflow worked, took a lot of tweaking, but it overall made the experience easier and more sustainable for those users. So people weren't calling support or desktop support or Adobe support to ask questions about, I can't get this thing to work. Like, it just works. And so a lot of the user-facing problems that maybe enterprise customers aren't as passionate about, if you do kind of solution-based evaluations, the overall approach to this product gets better when the user experience has less friction. And honestly, onboarding and training time, if you can drop those for any organization, generally they're happy with you. But it was understanding pain points for the customers. In broadcast, there's fairly high turnover amongst broadcast editors. And so making sure that the solutions we created were easy to learn, that there were certain things around permissions, that we could turn off permissions so somebody who's no longer working there doesn't have access. Some of the workflow things that didn't seem like big features were really, really important. And then they always, especially in enterprise, come up with a number of things that you're like, really, that is what you want? Seems real boring. but it's important to their specific need. I want to make sure nobody can use this color pink. All right. Don't know why you'd need that. Oh, because it's our competitor's brand color. Oh, okay. I guess that is important. So there's always this kind of, I don't understand that need, help me understand that need. And then you can replay that back for, hey, here's a user need. The user experience right now has significant friction. It's adding clicks to get to a good state. And we can reduce that, which reduces overall, failure points and increases satisfaction. And people are generally okay with that.
So my dad uses this metaphor with me a lot, especially when trying to finish projects. He says, you have to get those last 5 yards like in football. You have to push, and that's the hardest part because, you got 11 guys pushing up against you. I was wondering if and where this metaphor would be applicable to project management.
Ooh. I think there's two ways it's applicable. And I am doing this on the fly. This is freestyle applying of metaphors. The first is, I actually think it's the first 5 yards in product. Getting the right start is significantly important. Getting people into the thing you want them into is much harder than the polish, right? So making sure you have the right approach. I'd almost say the last 5 yards are the first 5 yards in product. On the flip side, because I can see it the other way too, and this is product management, I'm just going to give you different answers. On the flip side, to me, that's polish. That last 5 yards are the closing of gaps, the polish of workflow, the refinement of feature sets that make something feel done. I've worked on a lot of, I think we all have used tools or products or experiences that didn't feel like they were quite baked. And it's frustrating. And you get into it and you're like, this is unsatisfying. And I've just spent money on this. Ugh. Giving those experiences to people is a really good way to make sure they don't come back. And so understanding what the right level of done is for a customer is also that last 5 yards. So I did it both ways. So we've got 10 yards in product that are required. Yeah? Cool. Did you have one more question?
Last question.
Yeah.
What is your best day as a product manager? Where you're thinking, I can't believe they pay me to do this job.
Any day that I get to talk to customers who are actually using my tools and it's making their life better. Any day where I'm talking to customers who say, oh, this thing is really cool, but there's this thing I'd really like it to be able to do, and I can immediately get an idea of how that broader impact is and be able to take that back to the team and be like, hey, here's something we hadn't thought of, and we had a really smart customer, and when I was thinking about it, it ties into this, this, and this, and it opens up something brand new. And any day that I am learning and reading and experiencing something new that I find connections with things that I care about, I love that feeling of that aha moment where you've got, when I started working with YouTubers and I was like, oh, they have this whole other problem that we haven't ever addressed. They need social media metrics because they live and die by them, and it's one person and they've got, they're doing all of this themselves. We can fix that. That was amazing. And then anytime something cool ships. So when we've worked on something really hard and you get it in somebody's hand and they're like, this is the best thing ever. So those are my best days as product manager.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
Great job.
Thank you.